Chapter 20, Ill-Laid Schemes. Annihilation through trust. That was Nightmare's mantra for his plans going forward. If his goal of wiping humanity from the earth was to be achieved, then he would have to do so in partnership with humanity itself. And so, biting back his disgust and bitterness of them, the Dark Guardian knew for the first few centuries he would need to win the hearts of his future victims' ancestors. As Rivaldo sprung back to life with commerce, industry, and institutions focused on rebuilding, Nightmare made plans to travel to other towns and cities throughout the kingdom. Despite his success, Rivaldo was only one country in all the world. By rebuilding it, he planned on using this kingdom as a buffer to protect Edenfall from all others as he continued his quest. It would be a few more decades before he was ready, for he needed a great army to go before him to construct his empire. He found he needn't use any violence to accomplish most of his goals. For any who had come to oppose him, either a wayward noble or a bold peasant, quickly found all the gold they once possessed vanish from their purses or coffers. Those who dared defy him appeared to be punished by karma itself, left destitute in the wilderness or the streets. As Nightmare began his travels, he would hire many monsters from Edenfall to travel to assist him. Experts, teachers, but most of all, doctors and healers. Of all the healers he kept in his company, those he most favored were those of the Temmies. Temmies were small monster creatures all about the size of a medium dog, white fur, 2 sets of ears, and with enthusiastic, beady eyes. "Hi, I'm Timmy!" is how they always greeted anyone they first met, though there was an occasional Timmy with a radically masculine name such as Bob. Something about the little creatures Nightmare adored and kept in his company upon his travels. Their excitement had a way of disarming even the grumpiest of men, allowing him to gain further trust wherever he wandered. The Spectre family would also travel with his entourage, as they recruited humans in their company to help perform shows and propaganda on Nightmare's behalf. 6 years after Dream had fallen into his slumber, and 2 years since Nightmare's conquest of the capital, every nobleman found their wealth depleted, and no soul in the land went a day without food, shelter, and opportunity. Despite his hatred, Nightmare was getting used to the idea of being kind to the humans. Of course, they were far more pleasant to deal with when they thought they had something to gain from him. Nonetheless, Nightmare found that as peace grew, he would dream of Dream again. He couldn't help but believe his brother would have done something similar. In fact, Nightmare would encounter some of the old rebels who worked with Dream back when he came to rescue him over 6 years ago. 6 years. It felt like it had been so much longer. Despite the good he was doing, Nightmare spotted the Edenfall Royal Guard still following him, still with a warrant for his arrest. He instructed the others to be kind to them and to set a good example for them to tell their king. Still, it often frustrated Killer, Horror, and Dust to see them follow the party from place to place. The years continued on. Horror and Dust were obviously a couple, although they still referred to each other as best friends. Nightmare wasn't really sure why. There was no need to hide it. He could sense that they were in love. Not only that, they were obviously intimate, no longer hiding to share the same cot or bed. "It's just the way he prefers it," said Horror one day when Nightmare had asked him. They were staying in a small town made up of several vineyards. The dark skeleton followed Horror to a well where he was helping some of the children to draw water. "Dust prefers you to stay friends?" Nightmare tilted his head. "No, I mean, he prefers not to make a show of it. Careful, it's slippery," he said, handing a bucket to a small girl. "I'm not sure how to explain it. He wants to stay a loner without actually being alone. You know Dust. He's guarded. Doesn't want anyone to see him soft." And how does that make you feel?" said Nightmare, leaning against the well. Horror shrugged. "It's all right. I don't think I need any more from him. I just want to make sure you and the others are safe. Now, if you want someone to be worried about, it should be Cross. All this traveling will never help him find a partner. Unless you find someone else who's a good fit in our group, he might do better at a permanent post somewhere." "You mean add someone in or cut Cross out?" No. Maybe we should just return to the capital and stay a while. We could all help him find someone, help him figure out what he wants in his future." Nightmare tilted his head, looking to the setting sun. He didn't like the idea of losing Cross's closeness to the group due to romance. But keeping him like this wasn't exactly fair. Cross was loyal and true. He deserved the same happiness as the others had found. Still, a part of Nightmare feared losing Cross's companionship. Though he had gotten used to being kind to the humans, Nightmare felt he could only do so because the 4 skeletons were closer to him. They acted as a shield to keep any of those animals from getting too close. Perhaps we could stay in the capital for a while, Nightmare smiled at Horror. Cross deserves someone who will be kind to him, someone soft and sweet, who he could build a future with. Horror blinked but smiled warmly with a nod. Though Nightmare only planned to stay in the capital till after winter, they would remain dwelling in the university for many more years. Horror and Killer seemed more keen on the idea of trying to hook Cross up. It had to be a monster, of course, that was a must. But many of the monsters who traveled to Rivaldo initially did so because Nightmare had work to offer. Although there was some hope, with the economy improving, they were beginning to see monsters travel into the kingdom that, decades before, they would have found too hostile. The Celestial Doctrine had done much to change the human's perspective of monster kind. However, Cross didn't seem interested in anyone the other skeletons sought for him. Many monster women and men would end up falling madly for the night, but he in turn seemed too loyal to Nightmare, as if any time spent with another would rob him of his duty to his master. It made Nightmare suspicious. In spite of everything, could Cross still be in love with the Dark Guardian, unable to devote himself to anyone else? The thought came to him several times, but Nightmare pushed it away. He wanted nothing to come between him and Killer. The kittens had all grown up, several running off and coming back pregnant, putting the skeletons through several litters they needed to rehome. Killer didn't seem to mind it, though. He enjoyed taking care of new kittens each spring. 3 more years passed, which made it 9 years since Dream had fallen into slumber. Nightmare's dreams of his brother were, well, slowly growing into nightmares. He remembered the creature again, the one who had tried to take them, the witch that had claimed to make them, the ritual in the tree, the child sacrifices. What had that creature been trying to accomplish? Had it lied to the humans as he was currently doing? Had the creature really played a part in his birth? Though there was prosperity in the land, the stagnation of waiting was getting to Nightmare. Cross was occupied with building the Dark Guardian's military, but it didn't seem to be growing fast enough. Nightmare watched him from his balcony one day as Cross was training a squad of elite soldiers below. They were the best of the best, but most of all, each human of that unit could recite his doctrine by heart. Killer came behind him, wrapping his arms around his waist as he rested his head against Nightmare's back above the roots. "Bad dreams again?" Nightmare nodded with a hum. "The demon?" Sighing, Nightmare leaned exhausted against the railing as Killer rubbed his shoulders. "If I could kill it, I would. I hate that such a thing still haunts you." "It's curiosity, I'm sure of it." Nightmare turned to face him. "I tried to ignore it for so long, tried to avoid any truth if it does exist. I want to know what that creature was and why it wanted us." "Is there anything we can do to help?" Killer tilted his head, a worried grin. The only person who might have been able to help was Casilda. She was closer to the man who knew the demon and had performed the ritual for it. "Casilda." Killer's sockets widened. "That's the woman Asgore wants you arrested for, isn't it?" Nightmare nodded, holding his lover's hands. If any records still exist, Asgore would have them locked up. But it wouldn't be as easy as robbing a vault. I wouldn't know where to look, and even so, they're probably buried. "Maybe you could get someone to search for you. Bribe someone who knows where the records are and get them to find the answers you're looking for." That was an idea. Nightmare folded his arms, tapping his teeth with a finger. "You know, I know someone who could help us. But I know something that would be far more motivating than a bribe." Grinning widely, Killer pulled Nightmare close and lifted his chin. "Oh, I'm sure that brilliant mind of yours will come up with something." As Killer kissed him, Nightmare gently touched his chest, feeling the warmth of his soul. Though everyone below was distracted, if only they lifted their heads, they'd see their lord and his lover, his hands buried into the dark skeleton's robes. Over the past 5 years, the Edenfall guards continued to follow Nightmare and his party. They rotated over time, but the human, the doll named Red, and Shiroba always eventually returned to the duty of spying on them every couple of months. And Nightmare knew Shiroba was currently in Rivaldo. In Edenfall that night, a father returned late to his home. Though the walk wasn't far, he'd overworked himself by tutoring the latest member of the royal scientists. Having worked for the royal family for so long, he was considered a noble of Edenfall, and thus had a plot of land and an estate all to himself and his family. Making his way through the garden pathway, he knew his daughter's babysitter must have already headed home. But that was all right. Kanako was almost 8 now, a big girl. If she wasn't asleep, she wouldn't have too much to worry about for a few hours. However, as Chujin approached his house, he saw there was a light in the kitchen. No big deal, maybe the sitter forgot to turn off the lanterns. However, as he entered through the front door, he could hear his daughter's voice, along with another he didn't know.
Jasmine is my favorite tea. I like 3 scoops of sugar in it, but Mama says I shouldn't have too much.
Heh, your mama's right. A growing girl like you shouldn't have too much sugar. It's bad for you, said a man's voice.
We have leftover corn cakes to go with the tea. Papa really likes them.
Kanako, is someone here with you? Chujin called out as he put up his coat.
Papa! Papa's home!
Kanako cried out, her little feet pounding against the wooden floorboards. However, she turned back, her voice echoing,
Wait in the tea room! I'll bring everything out to you!
A second more, the little gray fox girl came running down the hall, throwing her arms around her father's legs.
Welcome home!
You shouldn't be up so late. Who's here with you? Chujin asked, petting her head.
Some friends of yours, a pair of skeletons. I already forgot their names, she giggled.
Skeletons? I don't know any. The scientist felt his heart leap in his throat. Going into tunnel vision, he turned to a door at the entrance that led directly to the tea room. Sliding it open, the light of the fireplace hit his face through the short hall. Sitting down at the kotatsu, waiting for him, were 2 skeletons. One dressed in black armor with tears leaking from his socket, the other the blighted dark guardian of the world tree. Nightmare sat with his back to the fire, the roots on his back curling in delight. Dr. Ketsukane, it's so good to see you. It's been nearly 9 years since we last saw each other. Grinning, Nightmare cupped his face in his hand, deeply amused by the terror he sensed from the fox monster. It's been wonderful getting to know your daughter. Kanako has been such a kind host.
I'm going to get the tea,
the fox girl chirped, not realizing the weight of the situation. She bolted back towards the kitchen. Kanako, wait! Chujin's voice cracked as he reached for her, but she was around the corner in less than a second. Come now, doctor, take a seat with us. You wouldn't want to scare the poor girl, would you? Said Nightmare, tapping at the table. Shaking, Chujin's hands gripped into fists. Carefully, he came down the hall, but stopped before entering the room. Why are you here? His voice lacked any warmth. That's no way to greet an honored guest. The other skeleton leaned back, tilting his head. He pulled a knife from his side, playing with the blade between his fingers. Now. The doctor's reaction is quite understandable. After all, I did murder your colleague in cold blood. Please, it would be easier for all of us if you cooperate, especially for your daughter and your wife, said Nightmare, motioning to the seat in front of him. The door linking to the kitchen opened as Kanako carried in a tray of cups and saucers, full of leftover corn cakes and hot tea.
Oh, I remember, Mr. Knight. I want to show you some of my drawings. Oh, look! The mask on the mantel! I painted it myself!
She said, pointing above the fireplace. The blighted skeleton turned, indulging the girl and complimenting her skill. The other skeleton, however, watched Chujin carefully as he came to sit.
I'll be right back. I'm going to grab my sketchbook from my room,
she said, before running off into the opposite hall. A very sweet girl. You must be so proud. Nightmare smiled as he started to pour the tea into each of their cups. I get it. You can do anything you want to us. Now get to the point. Why are you here? Said Chujin, trying to channel his fear into anger, but the shakiness in his voice betrayed him.
Gee, it's not one for pleasantries, huh?
Said the tear-soaked skeleton, reaching for one of the corn cakes to eat. He gave an approving hum at its taste. Nightmare sighed, first taking a sip of his tea. Very well. I really hoped this would be far more pleasant. I need you to do something for me. I'm sure the information I seek must be archived somewhere. Casilda would have known where it was. Before the monsters and humans united into one town, there was a man, Father Samuel. He had been conducting a dark ritual on the World Tree. I need as much information about that ritual as you can find. I need to know what he was doing. But most of all, I want to know as much about that creature that had given him the instructions to do so. Why do you need that information? Now that's something you don't need to be concerned with, Nightmare said as he took another sip.
Mr. Knight, look, here's my art, said the fox girl, running to his side. I made them all with colored pencils. Here's my papa and my mama and my friend Sadie, and some of the inventions Papa is working on.
The aura around Nightmare changed when Kaneko addressed him. Putting on a kind smile, he nodded. Very good, Kaneko. You're going to be a great artist one day. He seemed to be imitating his brother's voice when he spoke like that, a false sweetness that made Chujin's stomach turn. It was only then that Kaneko noticed something was wrong, looking at her father's emotionless face, his hands gripping his lap.
Papa, what's wrong?
With a deep breath, Nightmare stood. I'm sorry, Miss Kaneko. I think myself and my friend should excuse ourselves. It's very late. I would have loved to enjoy tea with you, but we're all very tired.
Oh, okay. Are you going to visit again, Mr. Knight?
She tilted her head, clinging to her sketchbook that was nearly as big as her. Of course. I'll be back in a month to visit. Your father has agreed to find something for me, Nightmare said, turning his gaze back to Chujin. He's assured me that he's going to make it his top priority to have it for me before my return, and that he's going to keep it a secret. After all, good friends keep each other's secrets. Chujin clenched his jaw, wanting to curse the blighted skeleton for his intrusion, but he kept his mouth shut. Poor Kaneko looked very confused, glancing between them before both skeletons made their way to the front door. Oh, and don't bother writing to you-know-who. Even if she were to retreat, I would find her before she made it to Edenfall. Find the information I asked for you, and you'll never have to hear from me again. As the front door opened and closed, Kaneko came to her father's side.
I don't understand. What was he talking about, Papa?
Eagerly, Chujin pulled his daughter into a tight hug. She hugged him back, but he could tell she didn't understand why he was so scared. Holding back tears, he didn't want her to get scared too. She didn't need to know who that was. Not yet. But could he risk telling Asgore what happened that night? Would Nightmare actually keep his word to leave his family alone if Chujin did this for him? After 2 days, fretting over Nightmare's threat, Chujin chose to send a letter to Shiroba anyway. Who knows? The mail service had been getting faster. Perhaps she would get word in time to leave Rivaldo. At the very least, he wanted his wife home and off this case of tracking Nightmare, since he was now threatening their family. The scientists would do as the blighted skeleton had instructed, diving into the royal vault to uncover Casilda's old records. It only took him a week to go through everything about the old human village, pulling what records survived about this Father Samuel Nightmare had mentioned. He made sure to research everything about it and make copies for the royal records, in case Nightmare planned to take everything he'd found. The Dark Guardian made no mention of destroying anything. That gave Chujin 3 weeks to prepare for Nightmare's return. 3 weeks to stew in anxiety, but the old fox had a plan. For her safety, Chujin had Kaneko sent away with a family friend. At least that way she would be safe from Nightmare's wrath. The poor girl begged not to be parted from her father, as she was already enduring Shiroba's absence. But even then she began to realize that the skeleton named Mr. Knight hadn't come for a friendly reason. And when he returned, dealing with him was likely to become dangerous. Chujin was unable to eat for days before the mark of Nightmare's arrival. All the records Nightmare could possibly desire were laid out, neatly organized on the kotatsu. The scientist also memorized every word contained in the records, so if Nightmare had any questions, he could avoid spurring the dark skeleton's wrath. And yet, he found himself pacing, drinking a cup of green tea since he had been losing sleep. His mind kept going back to the events of 9 years ago, when Dream went into his slumber. He and Shiroba had only started dating then. A terrible morning it had been, when he walked into work to be told by Asgore that Casilda had been stabbed to death by the young guardian. Though Asgore didn't want the news of the murder spreading throughout the city, losing his friend haunted Chujin for years afterwards. And now his mind was busy with dark imaginings, wondering if Nightmare would kill him in the same way. As Chujin paced the tea room, the fireplace flickered low for a moment, as if a wind might suddenly put it out. He was here. The door to the entryway opened and Chujin looked over, sitting down his tea. The dark skeleton entered alone, lowering his hood. Dr. Kitsukane, I trust that you have done as I have asked? Yes, everything you could possibly want to know is here, he said, motioning at the stacks of bound records. Stepping up to the kotatsu, Nightmare leaned down to pick up the first record he could see, flipping through it. Well, there's certainly a lot here. Yes, I took everything Casilda had. Anything that could possibly be known about Father Samuel is here. Well, this will take me days to sort through, but I'm sure you were thorough. Perhaps you can help me find what I'm actually looking for. Chujin took a deep breath. He knew Nightmare was going to do this to him. What does he want to know? I'm looking for the names of two skeletons, Sans and Papyrus. Did you see anything like that in the records? Oh, yes, I did actually. Hands shaking, Chujin got on his knees to sort through the pile. Picking up one of the books, he flipped through the pages. He was sure he saw the names of two skeleton children recorded next to the illustration of a gray beast. Finding the page, he stood back up, handing it over to Nightmare. The Dark Guardian's gaze focused intensely on the page. A titan? A god of the void. Sans Papyrus. As Nightmare was distracted by reading the text, Chujin slowly took a step back, reaching carefully into his robe. Every fiber of his body was on fire with fear, and it took everything to steel his nerves. Two skeletons, born of my magic and my flesh. One bears the image of the great destroyer, the other his forgotten brother. The human souls will not be enough. The Titan must have a monster's form, and it must split in two in order to exist within the world of light. Emotions shall be the bonds that hold their eternal lives to this plane. A child of light and a child of darkness. They shall be twins. This is what I was looking for. Chujin, you... It was now or never. Before Nightmare could turn to look at him, the fox leapt on the skeleton, throwing a metal collar around his throat, which locked in place. The Dark Guardian screamed, but his cry was cut short in abrupt silence by the magic of the collar activating. Chujin saw the edge of Nightmare's roots start to straighten into daggers, but they fell limp as Nightmare hit the floor. Writhing, his limbs scrambled and thudded against the wooden planks. Nightmare grabbed at the metal collar around his throat, trying to pull it free, but it would not budge. Not a sound escaped Nightmare's mouth as his eyelight set vindictively upon Chujin. Now! Grab it now! The scientist cried, backing away. Out of the walls themselves, wood panels opened as guards in leather uniforms jumped out. Surrounding the small skeleton, they grabbed him up and bound his arms, legs, and his whole body in chains. Chujin could see Nightmare was trying to scream, his mouth wide, body straining against his captors. So suddenly, the monster who was the greatest threat to his life now looked so small and helpless. In seconds, the front door opened as several guards entered, along with King Asgore taking a deep breath. Nightmare's head whipped around, his face expressing an especial amount of hatred towards the goat monster. Though he was completely bound, Nightmare thrashed violently against the chains. Much more of this and the skeleton would hurt himself. Quickly, put him to sleep, said Asgore. One of the guards nodded, casting a sleep spell over the Dark Guardian, causing him to fall unconscious. Holding his hands to his chest, Chujin breathed heavily, adjusting his glasses before they could fall off his nose. Asgore put a hand on Chujin's shoulder. Good work. I'm sorry we had to put you in a position like that. No, it's all right. There was no other way. If I wasn't here, he would have suspected something was wrong, said Chujin, taking a deep breath. I just hope this means my family is safe now. The king gave a stern nod, watching as his guards carried Nightmare away. Yes, they will. I will make sure Nightmare is incapable of hurting anyone ever again. That morning in Rivaldo, Cross wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary than his usual routine. Waking before dawn, he got dressed in a simple tunic and headed down to the officers' mess hall. He wouldn't put on his armor and weapons until after breakfast and coffee was consumed. Typically, he was the first one awake, aside from the cooks preparing the morning's meal for all the residents of the university. Cross had grown very proud of the work he'd accomplished here over the past few years. The university was back up and running to the state it had been prior to the first rebellions. Not only did they host free classes for the general public, but part of the school had been converted into a military academy. With the appropriate funds, along with patrons and charm, Cross had convinced many former commanders of the late king to serve Nightmare instead. Though the older generals were more hesitant to take the celestial doctrine to heart, their pupils were quite receptive. Having his coffee first, Cross waited at a table before one of the kitchen staff brought him a tray of seasoned sausage, hash browns, and vegetables. He thanked them, as always. Horror and Dust would soon join him, along with other officers under their command. Despite the loyalty they had built among the humans, there was still a slight divide between them. The skeletons were still visibly monsters, and with the exception of Horror, were shorter than their human counterparts. Now, Cross never let something like height be a bother to him. However, it was something of a concern to the culture of the humans. Along with the celestial doctrine, which preached the superiority of monsters over humans, though the skeletons were respected, they would never be seen as equals. When Cross still had rage in his soul for humans, he had been in agreement with Nightmare's written words. But now, after years of training humans to become soldiers, his hatred of them had lessened. They had the same struggles as monsters, the same hopes and dreams. Though they'd wiped out his people from his own world, the knight couldn't help but wonder if things could have been different. Halfway through his breakfast, quietly eating with Horror and Dust, a less expected visitor showed his face. It was Killer. His head looked around the mess hall before settling on them as he approached. Normally, he would have breakfast with Nightmare in his chambers, so seeing him here was a little unusual.
Have any of you seen Nightmare?
He asked, standing beside Cross. No, not since yesterday. Why? Said Cross. The other two hummed in agreement.
He didn't come home last night. He's never been this late getting back.
Killer folded his arms, tapping his foot. His bones were restless. Where was he going off to? Horror asked.
He didn't say.
No, wait. Turning around, Killer paced a few feet, biting the tip of his fingers.
No, I remember it was a month ago. We went to visit one of Asgore's scientists. He would have gone back there to follow up.
Asgore scientists in Edenfall? Cross shook his head. What was he doing there?
He had some questions about the humans who lived before Edenfall was formed. You don't think he would have gotten caught up, do you?
Cross and the skeletons looked between each other. For Nightmare, it seemed impossible he would have been captured, given his ability to move through shadow. If he was killed, they would already know, for his death would have triggered the apocalypse. But if he was injured, perhaps in a way that prevented his return, well, that was an entirely different story. Don't tell anyone he's gone until we know what's happening. We don't need a panic or any speculation, Cross whispered. Killer shook his head, nails digging into his arms.
Cross, I haven't been out of his presence for over 3 years. I think I'm going to be sick.
Let's assume the best for now, that Nightmare just got distracted. Because if we assume the worst, all that's going to do is make us worry.
What should I do? I'm supposed to protect him, and he isn't here to protect.
Grabbing his arm, Cross hushed Killer gently, pulling him in the seat beside him. Just stick with me. Let's give this a few hours and see if he turns up. Though Killer hanging around Cross instead of Nightmare was sure to raise suspicion, he feared what would happen if he let the neurotic skeleton haul up in Nightmare's quarters alone. Hands holding his head, Killer stared into the table. Though he hadn't eaten anything, he refused when Cross offered to have the kitchen bring him something. If Killer was correct, if Nightmare had somehow been captured in Edenfall, it would take a month before anyone would know. Even so, Nightmare hadn't shown back up after a day, 2 days, and then 3. Something clearly was wrong. And his absence was felt by the humans who relied on him. Having never planned for this scenario, Cross found himself as the de facto leader. Normally one might expect such responsibility to fall to Killer, but the skeleton started collapsing into panic attacks. Cross sent Dust to take Killer back to his quarters to calm down. Meanwhile, Cross knew he was going to have to make a public statement. You're going to have to come up with a story soon before the humans get suspicious, Horror whispered over Cross's shoulder as he looked out over the city from one of the balconies. I know. I can't just say that he's missing. That'll cause a panic. But if I say he's captured by Edenfall, what if I'm wrong? It could end up stoking anger in the wrong direction. Horror gave a shrug. Don't blame Edenfall. Make sure the blame is squarely on Asgore. People know Asgore has sent his guards to stalk Nightmare. It's easy to believe. And if you're wrong, it should be easy to clear up. That's right, the guards. Horror. I want you to find me where those guards are staying. I want them brought in for questioning. Horror gave a respectable but not too serious salute. Yes, sir. That evening, Horror, along with several other soldiers, had the hooded doll named Red and Shiroba brought in for questioning. However, there had been a scuffle between them, Shiroba landing a hard attack against Horror's shoulder, injuring him. They had at first refused to come quietly, as they were about to depart that night from Rivaldo. The third member of their party, however, had escaped. No, not just them, but the ghost who possessed the doll also escaped. She told this one to flee and warned Asgore, said Horror, carrying the limp doll under his good arm, referring to Shiroba. Hands bound, the foxwoman wouldn't be able to cast any spells. She was brought below the university where laboratories had been converted into a dungeon where she'd be interrogated. Arms folded, cross-watched as Shiroba was placed in a chair flanked by two of his soldiers. I'll get to the point. This didn't have to be so violent if you hadn't retaliated.
This didn't have to be so violent if your Dark Lord wasn't threatening my family,
Shiroba spat back. The knight stepped closer. What are you talking about? The door to the interrogation room opened as Killer and Dust joined them. Killer's lightless sockets focused hard on Shiroba as he came closer to her than Cross had. Where's Nightmare?
How should I know?
She tilted her brow.
I'm not playing any games, bitch,
he said, drawing his dagger to her throat.
Where is he?
Shiroba's eyes widened, but she stared back at Killer, not uttering another word. Killer. Cross put a hand to his shoulder, gently pulling him away.
He's missing?
Shiroba asked after a tense minute, as Killer paced behind Cross. Yes, what do you know of it? You said he was threatening your family, asked the knight. Looking away, Shiroba shook her head. I got a letter from my husband. A month ago, your lord showed up at our door threatening to harm me, my husband, and my daughter. He wanted information about the humans prior to Edenfall, and my husband asked me to return home as soon as possible. That's all I know. Where's the letter? Killer said sharply, turning his head. Shiroba went quiet as she looked at him, clearly not wanting to cooperate with the more erratic skeleton. Pushing himself forward, Killer accosted Shiroba, searching her robes for any pockets where the letter may be. She protested by snipping her teeth at him, for which he gripped her snout to hold her mouth shut. A second more, before Cross could remove him, Killer found the letter, backing away to read it. Cross's eyes met with the foxwoman again as Killer paced, reading over the words several times.
He says he has a plan to capture Nightmare, wasn't it? Wasn't it?
Horror grabbed Killer by the shoulder to hold him from pouncing on the woman again.
Damn it all, I'm gonna kill that motherfucker!
Killer, enough! Get him out of here, Cross said to Horror.
No, I'm the one talking now. You don't get to shove your way into control of everything now that he's not here,
said Killer, pushing his face and chest up to Cross's.
I'm gonna make sure any fucker who has laid their hands on him pays with blood or dust, starting with this bitch.
No, Killer, we need her. At the very least, she has some value as a hostage, said the knight, not backing down from Killer's threatening behavior. Gritting his teeth, Killer twisted his head about, getting his thoughts and words straight.
I'm in charge while Nightmare is gone. That means you obey me. Is that clear?
Only if you're in your senses, Killer. You know making the wrong move would make it harder to get him back, as well as managing the power he's built here. I'm fine enough saying you're in charge, but you need to get a hold of yourself.
I have a hold of myself,
Killer growled. All right, fine. Cross nodded. Though he didn't believe Killer, he needed him to calm down. Then let's keep this prisoner for now and go to discuss what we plan to do about this. Shooting one last venomous glare at Shiroba, Killer left the room, followed by Dust. Cross gave the foxwoman a look of apology, though it was clear from her own face that she didn't accept it. He'd have her sent to be locked in one of the anti-magic cells, as he and Horror followed Killer up to Nightmare's chambers. Pushing some of the books aside from the main table, Killer rolled out a map of Rivaldo and Edenfall.
I want the troops to move north and to station several camps along the border. All traffic and trade must immediately stop until Nightmare is returned.
We should probably send a letter of warning to Asgore as well, let him know about the hostage and find out if he has any demands, said Cross.
He won't have any demands, said Killer, leaning over the map. If I knew my Asgore, and for what Nightmare told me, The man has a blind sense of justice. His plan will likely to be to keep Nightmare locked up indefinitely. The only thing that would change his mind is if we make his city suffer as a result.
Cross nodded. I agree, but we should at least open communication with our own demands. How many men do you want sent?
5,000. No, 10,000.
Pardon. Dust held up a hand. Last I checked, Nightmare was the source of all our gold. How are we going to pay for this operation?
Nightmare kept a store of gold. There's about 3 months' worth to keep everything running. After that,
Killer said, trailing off. We'll have to collect some form of tax, said Cross. Oh, people will love that, said Horror, pulling out a chair for him to sit. Maybe it doesn't have to be a tax. Maybe some sort of alms? Cross put a hand to his chin. Anyone who donates a certain amount, we can give some sort of blessing or trinket to them for showing their loyalty. Larger donations we can promise to return with interest once Nightmare is returned.
That's fucking brilliant,
Killer grinned, pointing at Cross.
We'll have porcelain moon charms made. It'll be an incentive for people to fight for their faith.
Cross smiled back, glad that the plan was helping Killer somewhat out of his spiral. Exactly. For the next few hours, the four of them would craft a speech for Killer to deliver, to tell the people that King Asgore had Nightmare abducted out of jealousy of their kingdom's prosperity. They would announce the deployment of troops to the border to sanction any further trade, as well as plan for the donation of alms in exchange for blessings.
We'll make Asgore regret ever laying his hands on Nightmare,
Killer cried out to the crowd that morning, his knife to the sky, the crowd mimicking his gesture and fists. Though Killer's words were far more wrathful than Cross would prefer, the knight was surprised by the sudden outpouring of donations. Hundreds of citizens lined up at the university gates right after the speech. He quickly arranged for several instructors to take logs so that when the charms were finally produced, they could be given to those who participated. They would take donations all day and all night. The next morning, another crowd had lined up to participate. However, even with the outpouring of support, there was still no remedy for what Killer was going through. He didn't eat all day. That night, he was set to turn in after the military arrangements. Cross caught him before he passed out in the hall. Not wanting Killer's weakness to be seen, Cross carried the fairly light skeleton in his arms up to Nightmare's chambers.
Always the gentleman,
Killer moaned, coming to. You need to eat something. You won't be able to help Nightmare if you're weak, said Cross, gently laying him on the bed. I'll arrange to have some soup and bread brought to you.
I don't think I can eat anything. I've never felt so worried in my life,
Killer wheezed, closing his sockets. Cross took a moment to call a servant to bring the food before checking back up on Killer. He was nearly passed out. Don't fall asleep to get out of eating. Sighing, Cross had to admit he was worried too. He didn't think Asgore would do anything to hurt Nightmare. If he knew Nightmare well enough, the Guardian might hurt himself in order to get his way.
It's my fault. I should have known he was heading back. I should have gone with him,
Killer muttered. It's not your fault, said the knight, sitting on the bed next to him. We're going to get him back. Asgore's made a grave mistake with this move.
If anything happens to him, I'll never forgive myself.
Cut it out. He's going to be fine. The message for negotiations has already been sent out.
Sorry, Cross. I must look over dramatic. And I'm sorry for blowing up on you before.
It's all right. Cross shook his head. You're afraid. It's understandable. Sighing, Killer rubbed his hands against the pillow, still in his armor.
I'll be fine. I swear. You don't have to wait up for me.
I don't think so. I'm sticking around to make sure you eat, and make sure you don't do something stupid. Killer turned his head away in a huff.
No wonder you never found anyone always looking out for us.
Cross looked towards the window and sighed. I don't need anyone else. Looking after you all is enough for me. Feeling the mattress shift, Cross didn't look at Killer as he sat up.
That's so? You make it sound like a compromise.
The knight felt Killer lean against him, his arms against his shoulders as he laid his head on them.
You really wish there was someone for you, don't you? What kept you from looking?
Don't know, Cross shrugged. Guess. I just don't think anyone else could understand what we've been through. I don't think I could trust anyone to know what we know. Though he seemed calm, he was worried too. Nightmare is who I live for. I owe him everything. I'd do anything to keep him safe.
You feel the same as me then, don't you? The other two, They at least have each other, but we only have him.
Unsure what he meant, Cross turned his head, their faces close. A knock came to the door. Sighing, Killer pushed off him so the knight could grab the tray of delivered soup and bread.
Are you gonna feed it to me too?
Killer smirked, leaning against the headboard and cocking his head. Only if you refuse to eat it, he said, setting the tray next to Killer.
Okay, so how much do I have to eat?
The whole thing.
Ah, that's too much.
Nope, you can dip the bread in it. It'll make it easier. But you're not going to sleep until you make the bottom of that bowl dry. Killer huffed, picking up the spoon.
When Nightmare gets back, I'm gonna tell him you were mean to me.
Your threats are empty. Eat. Cross grinned. Finally, Killer took a few bites. Cross continued to talk to distract him until he finished eating and fell asleep. However, Nightmare was having a far less pleasant evening. Waking in the darkness, the Dark Guardian found his hands were still bound as he laid against the less ideal mattress. Adrenaline shot through his bones, bolting him to his feet. Roots still numb, he felt the iron brace still around his throat. His power also prevented him from speaking or crying out, which he tried to do at first, but no sound passed his teeth. Reaching hands out, he quickly found a brick wall, another brick wall, the bed, then an iron door with a slot for a window. With the shackles around his wrists, he banged at the door several times until the slot opened, light pouring in which caused him to squint. "He's awake! Inform the king!" Again, Nightmare tried to speak but couldn't, finding the magical brace quite the nuisance. As the slot closed again, the dark skeleton couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of helplessness. How long had he been away from Rivaldo? Oh no, what was Killer thinking? If he hadn't returned, his lover might be losing his mind at the moment. With nothing else he could do, Nightmare sat on the bed with heavy breath. The air hung thick in the tiny cell. He wasn't used to being in darkness like this and unable to flow through it, like a tide caught behind a dam. Several long minutes went by, perhaps not as long as Nightmare's senses interpreted. When the iron door finally opened, 2 guards rushed in, each with a latch pull to throw around Nightmare's neck. Though he tried to struggle to pull away, they were able to catch him easily, dragging him from the cell into his knees. In the prison hall, Asgore stood with the rest of his guards, staring down at the small skeleton at his mercy. Nightmare in turn glared up at the monster he might have once called father. "This would have been much easier for all of us if you had returned when you were summoned," Asgore said, his voice on the edge of a growl. "You will stand trial for Casilda's murder, and if you cooperate, the sentence may be lighter for you." Unable to speak, Nightmare retaliated by spitting at Asgore's feet, which he managed to move before struck by the black saliva. An angered sigh, Asgore turned away. "Take him to a regular cell, but away from the other prisoners. I want 10 sets of eyes on him on all times. The trial will be arranged soon." As the king walked away, Nightmare was forced back to his feet, dragged to another area in the prison. He refused to make this easy for them, even if it meant hurting himself. After all, any injury he suffered would reflect on his sweet sleeping brother. Before they could even bring him to the cell, Nightmare purposefully choked himself on the latches, forcing the guards to cast another sleep spell on him to prevent injury. When he woke, he was not yet finished causing his captors stress. Though this cell was larger, with a barred side to let in light and view of the guards. "He's awake again," one of them said. "Did he hurt himself too badly?" "No, I don't think so." The Dark Guardian wanted to growl, to express his frustration, but the damn collar kept him silent. Standing up, Nightmare went to the far wall, grabbing at the collar and throwing himself and it against the stone. "Hey, cut that out!" one of them said, but Nightmare didn't listen. Finding the seam of the collar, he tried again to break it against the stone, although he was roughing up his head and shoulders doing so. "Hey, I said stop! Damn it, we're gonna have to bind his arms." Nightmare heard the cell open and turned, rushing away from the incoming guards. Though he knew it was no use, he'd rather cause them trouble than do nothing. But as several pairs of hands grabbed him, his mind suddenly went blank. An old pain emerged in his bones. He could see Nero's face in his mind, laughing at him. Restraining his arms, they were pulled over his head and bound to the wall. Nightmare kicked at the guards, but he didn't have the physical strength to cause injury. One guard sighed. "Let that be the end of it." Asgore isn't going to be happy to see him like this. "It's better than triggering the apocalypse," they said, leaving the cell again. Nightmare wanted to scream, wanted to wail against his captors. Though his movement was even more restricted, he threw himself against the wall over and over. But for this, the guards seemed less worried. He'll exhaust himself eventually. Tears formed at the edge of his socket. There was nowhere for his rage to escape to. Taking several deep breaths, Nightmare really had run out of options. All he could do was wait and be at Asgore's mercy. There was no way in hell Killer or the others would stand for this. They'd come for him. He knew they would. Soon enough, there came the question on how to feed Nightmare. The warden wasn't pleased to see Nightmare bound up, but the guards explained that the skeleton kept hurting himself, therefore they had no other choice. When the guards went in to let Nightmare down so that he could have a meal, he thrashed at them again. Though he was being held to the floor, he refused to listen to their commands, once again having to be put to sleep. He would not cooperate. When he woke, the guards were still watching with a plate of bread, beef, and an apple set out for him. Without a second thought, he got up from where he laid, grabbed the plate, and threw it at the guards through the bars. The porcelain shattered. As the guards were reacting to the food on the floor, Nightmare returned to the wall, once again trying to break the collar. Same verse, same as the first. The guards once again entered and bound him to the wall. "We can't keep doing this," one of them heaved. Nightmare had a slight amount of leverage here. Any harm that came to him would be inflicted on Dream. He wanted to keep up the pressure. This trial that Asgore wanted so desperately would be his folly. As the hours stretched on, the guards attempted to negotiate with him. They would try attaching food to a poker to feed him from a distance. He would take it, then spit it on the floor. "This isn't going to work," another guard sighed. "They're going to have to drug him or something," said another. Nightmare felt his bones grow hot with rage at the suggestion, but it did seem like the logical next step. Days would go by. The guards continued to bring food, standing in the cell with the skeleton to try to entice him with savory meats or baked sweets. Still, Nightmare refused, thrashing out and yanking at his chains. After 3 days of not eating, Nightmare grew weak. Not able to fight as much, his socket remained closed for much of the day. The warden, noticing this, would call for the king and Dr. Alphys to assess the situation. As evening fell, he heard voices down the corridor enter.
"I do have a combination of magic and sedatives to make him more suggestible. Then he might eat. But if we have to do this for a long time, I don't know what it could do to him or Dream."
Looking away from where he hung, Nightmare recognized her, and she him. But the small yellow lizard woman avoided any familiarity. Asgore stood beside her, staring in through the bars and already looking exhausted by this whole affair. "Nightmare, if you don't eat, we will be forced to feed you. Don't make us do this," he said. Gritting his teeth, Nightmare huffed, infuriated by the fact he couldn't even talk back. "Alphys, do you have the solution with you?"
"Yes, sir."
The goat man held out his hand. "Give it to me. I'll do it. If anyone is going to incur his wrath, let it be me."
"Injecting the bone will be difficult," she said, digging into her leather bag. "But if you insert it into his tongue, it should work properly."
Soul thumping hard in his ribs, Nightmare banged the chains against the wall to show his dissent. Not that it would matter much. Stepping into the cell, Asgore carried the syringe of white liquid, their gaze locking. "I can only start to trust you if you stop struggling." If Nightmare could scream, he would. Yanking his arms at the chains, he struggled and kicked at the wall. The king sighed. Coming forward, Asgore's large hand gripped around Nightmare's chest and throat, shoving him into the wall. Though the skeleton's legs continued to kick, they couldn't make any contact. The pressure of being held down was causing him to slip from reality again. Everything went dark. The torchlights pierced his eyes. He can hear the men laughing. Maneuvering his hand over Nightmare's face, Asgore inserted the needle into the end of Nightmare's jaw, piercing his tongue. The pain shot down his throat and back, making him squirm even more. He felt the solution enter his flesh and his soul. Darkness again. It was pitch black. He gained consciousness slowly. The sound of birds singing could be heard beyond the walls. Laying back on the bed, his limbs felt heavy as stones. Long minutes passed as he heard the guards talking and moving about. Someone mentioned something about a birthday party, another about their child's math exam. Normal things that were going on in Edenfall beyond the prison walls. Trapped in his numb body, Nightmare thought of Dream again. He wondered if this was how his brother felt, frozen in time. He wondered if he could feel any of his pain. After a while, he managed to move his jaw, which was aching. If it was from the drug or from likely being force-fed, he wasn't sure. So what are we going to do about breakfast? Oh, I had some lovely biscuits and gravy, my wife. Not you, Nightmare. Oh, right. That's not going to be fun, is it? No, it wasn't. If it was the last thing he could do, he would make them have to suffer even an ounce of what he was going through. Taking a few deep breaths, he was able to pull up his legs, curling into a fetal position. Ah, is he awake? Don't know. Hey, you awake? Idiot. Nightmare's eye shot up over his arm, glaring at the staring guards, making them yelp in fright. That's a yes! Man, what happened to you? You used to be a kind person, said another in a sympathetic tone. Something about that struck a chord of guilt in him. Relaxing his arms, Nightmare hid his face again. They must be mistaking him for Dream. He was the one everyone thought was kind. A few moments later, he heard the guards moving about. Your Highness, Queen Toriel, how may we help you? Hands curling into fists, Nightmare froze as he heard her voice. I've come to see Nightmare. I heard what was happening. Your Highness, he's very violent. It might not be safe. Open the store. I'll have my breakfast with the Guardian. Peeking over his arm, Nightmare watched as the guards opened the bars, letting the Queen in. Several servants entered, bringing in chairs, a small table, and trays of food fit for a king. Slowly he sat up, his eyes on Toriel. The guards on the other side of the bars watched as the servants left. They closed the door but didn't lock it. Toriel sighed, finally looking at Nightmare. Her eyes carried a deep weariness as she sat at the table, pouring out a cup of coffee. Join me, please. Damn it all. The coffee smelled so good. He felt a headache suddenly come on as the drug was wearing off. Still, for several stubborn moments, he stared as she buttered her toast and started to eat without him. He hated that there was an audience, at least 6 guards staring at them. With a deep breath, a roll of the eye, Nightmare finally relented. His legs wobbled as he stood before reaching the chair. Toriel continued to eat, giving him no attention. Taking the cup she'd poured for him, he started to drink the coffee. He's eating! A guard gasped. Nightmare shot them a glare, making them stumble back. Please, a little privacy? The Queen spoke softly. Yes, Your Highness, said the warden before moving the guards to stand just out of sight of the cell. Continuing to drink, Nightmare watched Toriel carefully. Coffee wasn't really eating. He wasn't taking in any calories, nor would it help with hydration. I missed you, she said softly, finally looking at him. Nightmare paused. Setting the cup down, he looked away. We both missed you. We were worried something had happened to you and that we'd never see you again. As she spoke, she pulled a notepad and pencil from her pocket, setting it next to him. He stared at the notepad, then back at her. Part of him wanted to be stubborn and refuse this too. Still, he wanted to voice his anger. Taking the notepad, Nightmare attempted to write. However, his hands were shaking from having not eaten in 3 days. Taking a frustrated huff, he finally wrote out some words. Is this your idea of a family reunion? He held up to her, the letters slightly jagged. You're angry, I understand, she said, folding her hands in her lap. Something happened to you in the grove, something that changed you. He could tell she was being extremely careful with her words, as if walking on ice. He kept quiet for a moment, then shook his head. Obviously, he wrote. Nightmare, please, she said, her fear shifting to sadness. Please let us help you. We want you back home, whatever it takes. We can get you through this. If only you'd give us a chance. A little late for it. However, Nightmare's hand was shaking so much it pissed him off. Unable to scream, he threw the pencil down and stood up, starting to pace. He wouldn't be able to stand for long before he fell on the bed, lightheaded. Shoulders shaking, he covered his face, wanting to cry. Of course she would be the one to break him. He didn't notice her rise from her chair. When she touched his shoulder, he jumped slightly as she knelt beside him. Please, you must eat something. We want to help you. Unable to stop the tears, he slowly turned his head to look at her. Her eyes were full with a mother's love. Despite what he'd done, there was still hope there that he might come back to her. And deep down, he didn't want to disappoint her. He wished things could just go back to the way they were before. Sitting up, he'd start to pull his arms around her shoulders. Accepting his embrace, the Goat Queen wrapped her arms around him, lifting him from the bed. There, he cried into her shoulder, unable to speak, but would have said a dozen apologies for having fallen so far from grace. "It's going to be all right. You're safe now," she whispered to him, as if he were still a child. Though he partially resented it, he couldn't be angry at Toriel. After being away for so long, he hadn't realized how much he missed her. Getting a hold of himself, he gently pushed away before she set him on his feet. Still unable to use his words, he looked back at the table. In his quiet defeat, he would sit back in his chair, grab his plate, and start to fill it after shoving a biscuit in his mouth. His soul began to scream in hunger as he started eating, not worrying about manners. Though he still used the provided silverware, he wanted to sate himself quickly. Toriel sat back down as well, a soft smile on her face. He was glad she didn't say anything or make a comment about how he was eating. It was better for him to swallow his pride in silence.